more and more wars in that region in years to come.
Jim Smith, I was a U.S. Ambassador to Saudi Arabia from 2009 to 2013. Senator Murphy, I really commend you for challenging the status quo. While you're at it, I would ask you to challenge the status quo of the current foreign policy architecture in the region, because it takes us down the path of always supporting the status quo.
Thank you, very much for the question and the suggestion. I would hope folks, here might take a look at a piece that I wrote with two other senators, Senator Heinrich and Senator Schatz, making this case for a broader progressive foreign policy. Part of our pitch is that we are just miserably resourced to try to gain influence in the world, and the only way in which we are largely able to do that today is with our military and with military sales.
War and the enormous destructive power of our armed forces is our preferred manner for dealing with the very complicated and terrible crises in the Middle East. I fear that someday we will regret that decision, and that we are in fact laying the groundwork for more and more wars in that region in years to come.
And so we are selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of military equipment in the region and have no comparative ability to try to help reset the economic agenda in the region, because we have a pittance of dollars when it comes to ways in which to be helpful on the projects that our allies, maybe in a multilateral way, want to engage in economic development. So I just think that as a broader question of American foreign policy, we've got to understand that maybe a 20-to-1 balance in terms of military spending to foreign aid spending is not the right way to try to win friends and punish adversaries and enemies in the world, especially when almost every other country that's trying to grow influence has figured out that asymmetric influence is the way to go. We're kind of an apple in a world full of oranges these days. So that's a broader conversation, but a worthy one. When you get inaugurated in the United States Senate, you aren't taught about the complexity. You're taught that there are named enemies in the region and there are named friends.
I seriously doubt there are many people on the Congress of the United States who could explain the differences between a Zaidi Shia and a Twelver Shia.
It's all a reminder as to one of the reasons why we have been rather unsuccessful in the region trying to ply local actors to our ends.
When you go down the line and say, okay, well, how do you explain her being the architect and champion behind the war, the military action to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya?
One of the most hawkish members of Obama's cabinet was Hillary Clinton.
Worst mistake?
Probably failing to plan for the day after intervening in Libya.
Do you think Hillary Clinton would have been a better president than Barack Obama?
I have the sense that she's one of the more competent members of the current administration, and it would be interesting to speculate about how she might perform were she to be president.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
And when you look at the result of that action and that mission that she set out upon successfully, we've got a failed state full of chaos, thousands of lives lost, and now ISIS and Al-Qaeda having a stronghold in that country.
And I think you were more aggressive when knocking off Bashir Assad, too.
If she says she's learned from Iraq, then why is she championing this war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad and essentially promising to escalate that war if she's elected as president by implementing a so-called no-fly zone?
Don't you support knocking off Assad, Bashir Assad?
I think that given the bloodshed he has spilled, that would be a good outcome, but Americans aren't going to do it. That's not us doing it.
This is a complicated place that we fundamentally don't understand. And I think the lesson of all of the lessons over the last 15 years is to have a bit more humility about what the United States can and what the United States can't accomplish in the Middle East. We tend to dream up these grand plans as to how we are going to try to affect the political reality on the ground. And in the end, we should be mindful of the mistakes of hubris.
I'm glad you brought this up because there's a few really important points there. I think there's a very clear difference between what someone says and what they actually do. And that's where, as we look at this most important question of who our next commander-in-chief could be and what qualities we look for in them, we can tell what they will do by looking at their past.
Well, Secretary Clinton has, I guess I would say that she has tried to persuade Democrats that she would not be more hawkish.
We're in an order of magnitude now, which is substantially different. The Obama administration has now sold somewhere around $90 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia in 7 years. The low-end estimates are around $65–70 billion in arms. Take the low-end estimates. That's 3 times more than George W. Bush sold to Saudi Arabia. And George W. Bush was the biggest arms seller to Saudi Arabia in Saudi history. We've gotten into an arms relationship with Saudi Arabia, which is really enormous, and which therefore ought to be under the scrutiny of the American Congress and the American people.
And I think the war in Yemen is example A. And I would argue that our participation in the war is only silent here in the United States Congress and in Washington, D.C. In the region, it's not silent at all. Yemenis will tell you that this isn't a Saudi bombing campaign. This is a U.S.-Saudi bombing campaign. We are overt in our support for this engagement, given that it's U.S. munitions that are being dropped, it's U.S. refueling planes that are allowing for the missions to continue, and it's U.S. intelligence that is providing the information for the targeting.
There's a direct relationship between the tens of millions of dollars donated to the Clinton Foundation that allowed contractors to sell billions of dollars worth of arms to countries that were on human rights suspect lists.
The UN's head of humanitarian affairs has condemned these Saudi-led airstrikes. Tens of thousands of people have been injured, and the UN reckons around half of those killed in this war are civilians.
A consortium of American defense contractors led by Boeing would deliver $29 billion worth of advanced fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia contributed at least $10 million to the Clinton Foundation. Boeing, the defense contractor that manufactures the F-15, contributed $900,000 to the Clinton Foundation.
The result of this conflict has been the death of thousands of civilians, many of them reportedly targeted by Saudi bombers, has been the creation of enormous space for the growth of AQAP, which grows uncontested in Yemen today because of the refusal of the coalition to go after AQAP, given their preference to go after Houthi targets.
They are at war with the Houthis, but at the same time tolerating the creation of an al-Qaeda emirate in much of southern Yemen. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula today controls more territory than it has ever controlled before. It has an income, according to a recent study by Reuters, of between $2 million and $5 million a day because it's in the process of smuggling oil and other things out of its emirate in the southeastern part of the country.
And of course, the growth of ISIS in the region.
Somewhere over 20 million Yemenis are now facing a humanitarian catastrophe. 10 million or so are facing severe malnutrition, especially many, many children. Now, there are a lot of reasons why this war has become a humanitarian catastrophe, but I think when you look at it from some perspective, the much more responsible party is Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's allies in this war in Yemen. They have blockaded the country, not allowed humanitarian supplies in. They have repeatedly been involved in attacks on civilian targets, including hospitals, schools, and things like that. And the United States is a partner in this war. It is a partner every day, as you laid out, refueling aircraft, providing additional ordnance, providing intelligence, providing logistics. If the United States of America and the United Kingdom tonight told King Salman this war has to end, it would end tomorrow, because the Royal Saudi Air Force cannot operate without American and British support. We've not done that. If the problem is Iranian presence in Yemen, we don't have to bomb Yemeni cities for more than a year to resolve that problem. we can come up with a formula to ensure that Iranian military assistance does not go to the Houthis or President Saleh or anyone else. That's a relatively easy and doable thing to do. The point is we're engaged in a conflict that is having a humanitarian catastrophe. And I have an administration that has never explained what the American angle is in that war. The president has yet to explain to the American people why we are engaged in a war in Yemen against the Houthi, Saudi, Shia people.
Our named number one enemy in the region is Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Then why aren't we demanding that part of this campaign be dedicated towards taking out those interests in theater? And the reason is that right now, the coalition, of which we are a named partner, sees it in the strategic interest of the anti-Houthi campaign to allow for AQAP to continue, because AQAP is fighting the Houthis as well. And so AQAP's region of control expands. Arguably, that runs to the detriment of the Houthis, but we have never seen AQAP have control of as much territory and as much now income as they do because of their control of this major port city. And not a lot of conversation about why we have allowed that reality to persist.
Trying to rope this thing back in the future is going to be very difficult to do. And then we have a third Yemen that is controlled by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. That is, in the long term, a very, very dangerous situation to be in, because one thing we know about Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is it is determined to attack the American homeland. This isn't a question like ISIS. Maybe they will attack the American homeland someday. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has attempted to attack the American homeland over and over again. We were lucky on Christmas Day 2009 that they did not successfully detonate a bomb on an airplane over Detroit and kill hundreds of Americans. We were lucky in 2011 when the attempt to put a bomb on another airplane was foiled as it was going to come into Chicago O'Hare Airport. I just want to say a word about the Saudi Wahhab and the Saudi Iran issue. Yes, the alliance between the Wahhabi faith, no Saudi calls it the Wahhabi faith, they call it Islam, and the House of Saud dates back to 1744. It is the fundamental bedrock upon which this relationship exists. The voices of the clerical establishment are very, very powerful. And as an important point here, the clerical establishment is pushing the king and the royal family to be harsher on Iran, not to be less harsh on Iran. And that's a voice that they have to listen to. And we shouldn't expect that Saudi's theological beliefs are going to change in the future. They are not going to see Shias as an acceptable part of the Islamic community because they don't believe in the fundamental argument that lies at the core of Wahhabi beliefs, which is the oneness of God and a relationship with the oneness of God. But we don't need to engage in a theological debate with the Saudis. Saudi Arabia has in the past, on many occasions, had a relatively muted, hostile relationship with Iran. That is to say, there are large periods of time since the Iranian Revolution in which Saudi Arabia and Iran had normal diplomatic relations. They engaged in high-level conversations. The period we're seeing now is, in fact, a break from the past. I'm not saying that they ever loved each other. They've never loved each other. That's pretty clear. We know that from an awful lot of material. But King Abdullah, for example, tried very hard after the Khobar attacks in 1995 to avoid the conflict coming to an open war between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. on one hand and Iran on the other. Mohammed bin Salman may be the next king of Saudi Arabia. There's a very good chance he will. And the United States should have a relationship with him. But we should also have a relationship in which we are prepared to say to our friends, don't drive drunk. And what Saudi Arabia has been doing for the last year in Yemen is effectively driving drunk. It's time for the United States to get out of the back seat and tell the Saudis, let's find a way to end this war, which is in our mutual interest.